Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today's episode is going to be a $50 deck tech. When I say $50, I mean that is an overall deck cost. Both shipping and commanders that are $10 or less are going to be included in that cost, but basic lands will not be. Decks on this channel are built to be fun, inexpensive, and focused. If you want to learn more about what a focused commander deck is, check out this video here. On this deck tech, I'm going to take you through its strategy, the tactics, and how this deck wins. This show and episodes like this one are possible because of viewers like you. So if you're looking for some easy ways to help support the show, make sure you like this episode and share it with friends. And make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Thank you to everyone who's already purchased our merchandise, it really does help support the channel. Another easy way to support this channel is by using our TCGplayer affiliate links. So make sure that you're looking for those links in the description whenever you're buying a deck or just individual cards. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. Today's commander is the Gitrog Monster. It's a 6/6 frog horror that has death touch and costs 3 black-green. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice the Gitrog Monster unless you sacrifice a land. You may play an additional land on each of your turns, and whenever one or more land cards are put in your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. So this unassuming yet creepy looking frog might not look like it, but it is an incredible combo machine. Because it lets us play an extra land each turn, sacrificing one during our upkeep is no big deal. And each time we do sacrifice a land, we draw a card. But on top of drawing whenever we sacrifice a land, it draws us a card whenever a land hits the graveyard from anywhere. So that can be from our hand if we discard a land, or it can be from our library if we mill one. And the more lands we draw into, the more we can discard to draw into more lands. With the right build, this can get out of control very fast. So what's our strategy with this deck? Well, we're going to ramp quickly and get set up to mill our entire deck. With the right hand, even this deck on a budget can win at breakneck speeds. So then after we mill ourselves, how do we win? Well, we're going to generate infinite mana and drain all of our opponents. There's actually a few ways that we can win, but this is the most efficient one. And don't worry, during the episode, I'm definitely going to be explaining how it all works. As with all Commander's Quarters decks, I'm going to take you through 10 different tactics that show you how the deck works and how we're going to win with it. So let's begin with tactic number 1, start it up. First up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble, which we can pay 2 and tap and sacrifice it to go get a basic land and put into play tapped. Next up, there's Search for Tomorrow, which is another fantastic turn 1 play. It has to spend 2 for a green, and it says search your library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield. Keep in mind that that land comes into play untapped. And then we've got some great turn 2 plays with Rampant Growth, Edge of Autumn, and Sakura Tribe Elder. Rampant Growth and Edge of Autumn go get us a basic land and put into play tapped. And by sacrificing Sakura Tribe Elder, we can do the same. Next up, we've got Harrow, which makes us sacrifice 1 land, but we get 2 into play untapped. And Springbloom Druid does the exact same thing, but those lands come into play tapped. But we're not nearly done with ramping just yet. So it's time for us to move on to tactic number 2. Quickly now. First up, there's Sol Ring, which costs 1 and can tap for 2. Although we have to have the perfect hand, Sol Ring makes it possible for us to win as early as turn 2. We're also going to be running Golgari Signet and Talisman of Resilience. By paying 1 and tapping Golgari Signet, it's going to add both of our colors. And then the Talisman can tap for colorless or can tap for either of our colors but deals 1 damage to us. But we're also running some mana dorks too. Both Elvish Mystic and Llanowar Elves tap for a green. And Elves of Deep Shadow taps for a black but deals 1 damage to us. We're also running Arbor Elf, which we can tap to untap a forest. This ability works especially well with both Wild Growth and Fertile Ground. Wild Growth says whenever enchanted land is tapped for mana, its controller adds additional green. And Fertile Ground does the same, but it can be 1 mana of any color. But we're still not done with ramping just yet. So now it's time for tactic number 3, even faster. First up, there's Dark Ritual, which costs a black and is going to add black to our mana pool. Now, a ritual like this one is just a temporary source of ramp, but in this deck especially, it can be a lot more. First off, it can get us that extra mana that we need to go off, and with the right setup, it can be part of a combo that generates an infinite amount of mana. But we'll touch on that one later. So we're also running another ritual with Culling the Weak. For a black and at the cost of sacrificing a creature, we add black. We're running plenty of disposable creatures in this deck, and again, this can actually be part of an infinite combo for setup right. Finally, there's Reign of Filth, which is an interesting take on a ritual. It says until end of turn, lands you control gain, sacrifice this land and black. Sacrificing our lands is a very small price for us to pay to win. And remember that each land that we sacrifice is going to draw us a card when our commander's in play. This card can give us that extra push that we need to combo off. But how are we going to combo with this deck? It's time to go through the first piece that we need in tactic number 4, discard. So the first part of our combo is that we need a free discard outlet. So we're going to be running things like Putrid Imp and Olivia's Dragoon. Both are cheap for us to get out and they let us discard cards for free. The fact that we give them flying when we discard a card does not matter. We just need to be able to discard cards as many times as we want. Because with our commander in play, whenever we discard a land, we draw a card. So if we can keep discarding lands, we can keep drawing. So we're also going to be running Wild Mongrel, Noose Constrictor, and Oblivion Crown. Both Wild Mongrel and Noose Constrictor get +1/+1 for each card that we discard with them. And Oblivion Crown basically does the exact same thing because it gives that ability to any of our creatures. And on top of that, it has Flash so it can help us win out of nowhere. Next up, there's Patchwork Gnomes, which costs 1 more, but it can be a lot harder for our opponents to deal with. It has discard a card, regenerate Patrick Gnomes, but it might be even harder for our opponents to deal with an enchantment like Volrath's Dungeon. It's a pretty old card, so I'm going to read its Oracle text. It says, pay 5 life, destroy Volrath's Dungeon. Any player may activate this ability, but only during their turn. And then discard a card. Target player puts a card from their hand on top of their library. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. So one of our opponents can destroy this enchantment for a pretty low cost, but only during their turn. So essentially, we're just going to cast this when we can combo off right away. If we can keep discarding land cards with this, we can take out all of our opponent's hands. That's going to make it nearly impossible for our opponents to stop us. And this card actually opens up the door to another combo, but we'll get to that later. For now though, let's take a look at the main discard outlet that we use for our combo. In a deck like this one, Scourge Familiar is broken. It says discard a card, add black. So whenever we discard a card, we're generating mana. And if we discard a land, we generate mana and we draw a card. If we somehow can keep drawing into lands, we can generate as much mana as we want. But how can we make sure that that happens? So let's go over it now in tactic number 5, absolutely DREDGE-FUL. So with this tactic, we're actually going to start off with our Golden Pig, which is the #1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is actually a land with Dakmor Salvage. It may enter the battlefield tapped and only tap for a black, but it has Dredge 2. Dredge is a very interesting and powerful mechanic in Magic. For Dredge 2, it says, if you would draw a card, instead you may put exactly 2 cards from the top of your library into your graveyard. If you do, return this card from your graveyard to your hand, otherwise draw a card. Essentially, we're going to be set up once we have this in our hand and our commander and a discard outlet in play. So let's use Scourge Familiar as an example of an optimal combo piece. We're going to discard Dakmor Salvage with Scourge Familiar. When we do that, we generate 1 black, Dakmor Salvage goes into our graveyard, and the Gitrog Monster triggers. Now, instead of drawing that card from Gitrog, we're just going to Dredge 2. So we mill 2 and then put Dakmor Salvage back in our hand. If either the 2 milled cards are lands, we get to draw a card. With Dakmor Salvage back in our hand, we can repeat this loop as many times as we want, gaining a black mana every single time. Now, you might be thinking that eventually we've got to run out of cards and we can't keep going. Because in order to Dredge 2, you actually have to have 2 cards in your library to dredge. And that's why we're going to be running either Ulamog or Kozilek. Just kidding, those cards are pretty expensive. What we will be using is both Vigor and Dread. Each of them says whenever they're put into our graveyard from anywhere, we shuffle them back into our library. Now the Titans are definitely better since they shuffle our entire graveyard back into our library, but beggars can't be choosers and these still work. Essentially, whenever we mill one of these 2, they go right back into our library. So let's fast forward a little bit to illustrate this. We discard Dakmor Salvage to add another black mana. Gitrog's gonna trigger, but instead of drawing that card, we're gonna Dredge 2. Both Dread and Vigor are gonna hit our graveyard and shuffle right back into our library. Then Dakmor Salvage is going to go right back to our hand. So again, we're at the exact same spot, but we're up a black mana. So we can do this as many times as we want to, essentially generating us infinite black mana. Now there are plenty of ways that we can win from this spot, even without a hand, but we'll tackle those later. First, let's talk about how we're actually going to get to this combo. Dakmor Salvage may be the only land that dredges, but it's not the only card that dredges in this deck. Dark Blast, Shambling Shell, and Greater Moss Dog each have Dredge 3. And next up we've got Golgari Thug, which has Dredge 4. Then we take it up another step with Stinkweed Imp, which has Dredge 5. And finally there's Golgari Grave Troll, which has Dredge 6. Now we can also combo with these other dredge cards, but in a different way. If we dredge and hit a land, we're going to be drawing a card. And then we can replace that draw by dredging again. Essentially we can just keep dredging until we hit Dakmor Salvage. Golgari Grave Troll is going to be the best at doing this since it has Dredge 6. When we're milling 6 cards, chances are one's going to be a land. The other dredge cards work great too though. But as soon as we hit a higher dredge card, we're just going to use that one. But outside of dredging, we've got some other ways to make sure that we can get our combo. Let's go through them now in tactic number 6, tutor time. First up, there's Sylvan Scrying, which will just let us go get Dakmor Salvage and put it into our hand. For just 2 mana, that's a really good deal. And then we can just transmute Brain Spoil to go get Scourge Familiar for 3 mana. Then there's Diabolic Tutor, which can get either of our combo pieces for 4 mana. Next up, there's Shared Summons, which will let us go get 2 creatures at instant speed and put them into our hand. So for example, we can get Scourge Familiar as well as Golgari Grave Troll to start dredging. And then there's Dryad's Orders, which puts 1 creature into our hand and 1 into our graveyard. Again, it really doesn't matter to us if that dredge creature is in our hand or in our graveyard. And Final Parting does the exact same thing, but with any 2 cards. So this can actually go get us both of our combo pieces. But outside of tutoring, we've got some ways that can just help us dig. So next up, we've got tactic number 7, I Can Dig It. First up, we've got Satyr Wayfinder, which when it enters the battlefield, we reveal the top 4 cards of our library. We can put a land from among them into our hand and the rest go into our graveyard. So if we need a land into our hand, great. If we want it to hit the graveyard, that's good too. Again, if one or more lands are put into our graveyard, we get to draw. So we're also going to be running Grisly Salvage. It's similar to Satyr Wayfinder, but it gets us the top 5 cards of our library, and we can put a creature or land from among them into our hand and the rest into our graveyard. And finally, there's Grapple the Past, which is similar, but it goes about it in a different way. It says put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard, then you may return a creature or land card from your graveyard to your hand. So unlike Grisly Salvage, we can actually choose a card that's already in the graveyard. Now, tutoring and digging are great, but we also want to make sure that we can protect our combo too. So let's move on to tactic number 8, safety first. First up, there's Gaia's Blessing, which says, target player shuffles up to 3 target cards from their graveyard into their library. Draw a card, and when Gaia's Blessing is put into your graveyard from your library, shuffle your graveyard into your library. So if for some reason we have to shuffle 3 pieces back into our library, we can. But where this really can come in handy is when it gets milled, because when that happens we can shuffle our entire graveyard back into our library. This allows us to keep dredging into even more cards. Now in competitive Gitrog decks, they can use one of the Eldrazi Titans to work with Gaia's Blessing and shuffle everything up, because in this deck Gaia's Blessing is much better if you mill it, but not as good if you draw it. So by discarding both Gaia's Blessing and then the Titan, you can shuffle it back into your library and do it again. But even without access to a Titan, we've got a way to go infinite with this. Earlier I mentioned that Volrath's Dungeon can combo with this deck too. If we happen to draw Gaia's Blessing, we can use Volrath's Dungeon to discard a card and then put Gaia's Blessing back on top of our library. Then we just have to dredge and Gaia's Blessing is going to hit our graveyard from our library. Then we're going to shuffle it and our graveyard into our library. So as long as we can keep dredging with something like Dakmor Salvage, we can just go infinite with this too. And with this loop, we actually don't need Scourge Familiar to generate infinite mana. Long story short, as long as you can cast Dark Ritual the first time for just a black mana, you can keep casting it over and over again. Sometimes you're going to mill it, but sometimes you don't, and you can just keep recasting it and adding 2 more mana to your mana pool. Now this is pretty much a secondary combo, but it works very well too. It's also a combo that might come out of nowhere and surprise your opponent since Volrath's Dungeon doesn't see much play. According to EDH Rec, it shows up in less than 1% of decks in general and less than 1% of Gitrog decks too. Outside of Gaia's Blessing though, we're running some other safety cards too. Crows and Reclamation says, target player shuffles up to 2 target cards from their graveyard into their library. So we can either target ourselves with this if we need to, or someone else. And since we can flash it back, we can use it even if we mill it. And if one of our combo pieces gets exiled, Rift Sweeper can go get it back for us. Next up there's Autumn's Veil, which is a great way to protect our combo. It says, spells you control can't be countered by blue or black spells this turn, and creatures you control can't be the targets of blue or black spells this turn. That's a good amount of value for just a green. And then we're running Dread Return, which is a fantastic card in this deck. It says return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield and has flashback of sacrificing 3 creatures. We're running a good amount of creatures in this deck, and we've got a way to make creature tokens too. So if we mill or discard this, we can essentially cast it for free. If we can get our Scourge Familiar back with this, our opponents are going to be in big trouble. And finally there's Raven's Crime, which is a great card in this deck. When we're comboing off, this can essentially strip all of our opponents of their hands. It has Retrace, so we can essentially just cast it from our graveyard by discarding a land in addition to its cost. As long as we can pay their cost, Retrace cards are basically discard outlets in our graveyard. But we've got some more ways to throw a wrench into our opponent's plans. Let's go over them now in tactic number 9, no more toys. First up there's Nature's Claim, which says destroy target artifact or enchantment, its controller gains 4 life. That life really doesn't matter since when we combo off, it's not going to be relevant. We're also going to be running Return to Nature, which lets us destroy an artifact or an enchantment or exile a card from a graveyard. This is a very flexible card that can help us out in a lot of circumstances. And finally there's Unravel the Aether, which says choose target artifact or enchantment, its owner shuffles it into their library. So this is a great way to fight against indestructibility as well as artifacts and enchantments that can be recurred. So we've talked about setting up our combo, comboing, and dealing with our opponent's stuff. But how do we actually win? So let's go through them now in tactic number 10, CROAKED. First up there's Siphon Life, which is going to be our main win condition. It says target player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life, and it has Retrace. So when we have infinite mana, we can essentially just cast this over and over again by discarding Dakmor Salvage. We can cast this as many times as we need to drain out each and every single one of our opponents. Next up we're going to be running Worm Harvest, which is a good backup plan, and it's a way just to make tokens if we need them. It says create a 1/1 black and green worm creature token for each land card in your graveyard. And again, it has Retrace, so we can cast it from our graveyard by discarding a land. So when we're comboing off, we can make an infinite number of worm tokens. And again, if we need to cast it earlier for something like Dread Return, we can. And finally we can use a combination of Centaur Vinecrasher and Gerard. When Centaur Vinecrasher enters the battlefield, it enters with a number of +1/+1 counter on it equal to the number of land cards in all graveyards. So with the amount of lands that we're milling, this is going to get huge when it comes into play. It also has whenever a land is put into a graveyard from anywhere, you may pay green, and if you do, return Centaur Vinecrasher from your graveyard to your hand. So essentially we can always get this back when we need to. And then with Gerard, we can pay 1 black green to sacrifice another creature, and each opponent loses life equal to the sacrificed creature's power. So by sacrificing Centaur Vinecrasher, we're going to drain our opponents for a ton. And like Centaur Vinecrasher, Gerard can return himself by sacrificing a swamp and a forest. Because this combination requires a decent amount of green mana to work, it's a good backup plan, but not our main one. This deck can be brutally fast, and the main win conditions are hard to stop once we get comboing. But now that we've gone through the spells in this deck, let's go on to the mana base. First up, we're going to be running Cryptic Caves and Emergent Zone. We can pay 1 and tap and sacrifice Cryptic Caves to draw a card, but only if we have 5 more lands. And then we can pay 1 to tap and sacrifice Emergent Zone to cast spells this turn as though they had flash. Next up, we've got Crystal Vein, which we can tap for 1 mana, or we can tap and sacrifice it for 2. And then there's Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, both of which we can tap and sacrifice, search our library for basic land and put into play tapped. And then we've got Barren Moor, Desert of the Glorified, and Polluted Mire, which each enter the battlefield tapped, and it can tap for a blank, but we can cycle them too. Next up, there's Tranquil Thicket, Desert of the Indomitable, and Slippery Cars, which each do the exact same thing, but they tap for a green. And then there's Drownyard Temple, which we can return to play from our graveyard by paying 3. Next up, we've got Foul Orchard, Golgari Guildgate, and Jungle Hollow, which each enter the battlefield tapped and tap for either of our colors. And then there's Golgari Rot Farm, which is going to bounce one of our lands and enter the battlefield tapped, but it taps for both of our colors. Next up is Llanowar Waste, which can tap for a colorless or can tap for either of our colors but deals 1 damage to us. Then there's Tainted Wood, which can tap for a colorless or can tap for either of our colors if we control a swamp. Finally, we're going to be running 23 basic lands, 15 of those will be a forest, and 8 will be a swamp. And now that we've gone through every single card in this deck, let's do a quick price check. A quick reminder that our deck costs are calculated using TCGplayer optimization, optimizing with even heavily played and damaged cards because those cards need a home too. The average Gitrog deck on EDH Rec will set you back $568.66. Our deck is going to be much more affordable, coming in at $49.42. Again, the price of this deck is the price that I got for it on the day that I'm recording. If you want to see a breakdown of this deck's cost, check out the link in the description. Keep in mind that prices can and will fluctuate and change over time. But with these deck costs, I want to be as transparent as I possibly can. Again, Commander's Quarters decks are built to be tuned and focused within their budget, but there are always ways that we can improve on them. So let's go through some reasonable upgrades now to see what some of those ways just might be. First up, we're going to upgrade this deck by putting in Ash Barrens and taking out a Forest. Ash Barrens works very well in this deck because when we cycle it, we actually get to draw another card too. Next up, let's add an Expedition map and take out Grapple of the Past. It's just another great way to guarantee that we can go get our combo piece. And then we're going to add in Birds of Paradise and take out Fertile Ground. This deck is about speed and Birds of Paradise is a fantastic piece for it. Next up, let's add in Rainbow Excavator and take out Satyr Wayfinder. It just works very well in combination with our commander, especially with lands that can sacrifice themselves. And then we're going to be adding in Veil of Summer and take out Autumn's Veil. Veil of Summer is just a strict upgrade to Autumn's Veil and does everything it does better. Finally, we're going to be adding in Entomb and taking out Grisly Salvage. Entomb is a fantastic way to go get a dredge piece or one of our combo pieces too. And if you want to see a CEDH version of this deck, go ahead and check out the Spike Feeders. The Gitrog Monster makes an appearance on multiple episodes, but the most recent one is Season 3, Episode 10. So if you haven't checked out the Spike Feeders gameplay channel yet, now's the time. And with that, our show is coming to a close, but I really want to hear about your thoughts on these picks, so why don't you let me know in the comments below. And make sure that you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Links to our social media accounts can be found in the description. Also in the description below is a link to the Commander's Quarters Patreon page, and I just want to say a quick thank you to the patrons who have subscribed so far. There are many benefits to being a patron for the Commander's Quarters, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There's even a general level tier where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. I truly couldn't do this without all of your support, so from the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again and have a good one.